It begins and ends with this. If you don't fundamentally understand the core business of dentistry, you're going to get into trouble. And you'll get into trouble across all kinds of stuff. It seems like if you don't fundamentally understand the business of dentistry and you want to go buy a DSO organization or go, form a DSO, it's going to be really tricky. But if you take the time to understand the fundamental business of dentistry, or if you're an investor and you don't get it, but you back the right operators that understand it, and they do, not that you're going to be exempt from, stuff will happen to you, but stuff will happen to you few and far between.
Hey there, dental economist. If you're a dentist owner or a leader within a dental business thinking about growing production, case acceptance, patient and staff satisfaction, positive outcomes, and everything else that comes with running a dental business, then you're a dental economist, and you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Dental Economist Show. We're meeting at the intersection of profit and purpose as I sit down with dental leaders who share their stories about dentistry, business, and growth. Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show with me, Mike Huffaker. Today, we're honored to welcome someone that really doesn't need an introduction, but we do introductions on this show, so we're going to go ahead and stick with that. And that's Brian Colao, a trailblazer in the legal realm of the dental service organization industry. As the director of the DSO Industry Group at Dykema, Brian has transformed Dykema's DSO group into one of North America's most respected leaders in DSO transactions and compliance, advising clients on everything from mergers and acquisitions to complex healthcare regulations. With over 25 years of experience, Brian's been a central figure in shaping the legal framework that governs DSOs, particularly through his pioneering work on corporate practice and compliance standards. He also founded Dykema's award-winning Definitive Conference for Dental Service Organizations, which I will attest is the must-attend event for DSO leaders, investors, and innovators. Brian, thrilled to have you on the show. It's been a long time coming.
Well, you didn't mention that this one, DSO Thought Leader Award from Planet DDS. Now, that was my favorite of all of them. Now, maybe because of conflict of interest or something, you didn't mention that one, but I was very proud to get that one and very happy to be here.
Thank you. I know it's been a long time coming. I was worried we wouldn't be able to get you. I know you don't like to do too many public speaking engagements or any public discussions about things. So it was an honor to have you join. And I'm actually really looking forward to diving into some topics that maybe I haven't heard you talk in depth on before. And I think let's just start with a business topic. You and I were speaking, I don't know, maybe a month or so, and you brought up the requirements that a DSO has legally to provide support value. I can't remember exactly how you worded it, but if you could go into a little bit more detail about what those obligations are when you're forming a DSO.
Well, I mean, the obligation is to comply with the law, right? And the law, I think there's 45 of the 50 states will not let non-dentists own dental practices. Obviously, if you could just own a dental practice, like you could do I think you're in Arizona, you could do it there. You could do it in Utah. You could do it Wisconsin, South Carolina. I think New Mexico with a license, with a non-dentist owner license. If you could own a practice directly, then you don't got to mess with anything. You just buy the dental practices and split the profits like you would with any other business. But in 45 of the 50 states, non-dentists cannot own dental practices. So the only way, a non-dentist can participate in the business of dentistry is through a DSO model, Mike, which is to provide non-clinical administrative support services by contract. It's a contractual relationship. So you can imagine what we were discussing, that you're talking about a month ago or whatever, is if you have a contract, the way you get paid is by providing non-clinical administrative support services. It goes without saying that you kind of got to provide those services, or else you really don't have any basis to charge management fees and, participate in any of the revenue. So I think that's the conversation we were having, about a month ago about in 45 of the 50 states, the only way a DSO gets paid and can exist is by contract through providing, contractual obligation, if you will, to provide non-clinical administrative support services to dental practices that are 100% owned by licensed dentists. So that's what we were talking about.
So is there a spot where those non-clinical services begin and end? Obviously, there's a lot of variation that different groups have related to what they provide. Could just be marketing.
There's a couple questions in there, okay? The first question I'll answer is they have to end the bounds of the law, right? So they end at the practice of dentistry, meaning you can provide any number of services you want across a wide spectrum of activities, but you can't practice dentistry. So, once you start to get into, setting prices or setting hours or dictating clinical protocols to patients or deciding what insurances to take, without any consultation with the dentist owner or something, you can get into trouble in those situations. So, the absolute limits of non-clinical support services is the practice of dentistry. You can't encroach on the clinical side, but you can do anything from very little to comprehensive. There are some DSOs that just do a couple things. Maybe they handle HR, maybe they handle billing and collecting, and that's it. Some will do marketing, billing, collecting, and then you have many DSOs that it's comprehensive non-clinical support services. It's literally everything. It's billing, it's collecting, it's HR, it's marketing, it's accounting, it's legal, it's compliance training, it's site selection if they're out there picking up, de novos, it's technology, it's IT, basically it's a turnkey comprehensive solution, sort of, to think of it like this. Anything that's not the practice of dentistry, they do. The only thing they don't do is the practice of dentistry.
So when DSOs are out there and they kind of advertise in a sense, well, we allow for the people to retain clinical autonomy. That's kind of just part of the deal in a sense, right?
Yes, it would be like, Mike, I let you breathe oxygen if you come to my house, and you're like, okay, that's nice, but I'm going to do that anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think the reason they say that, though, yes, that's the law and they have to do that. But the reason they say that is if you go back to the very inception of the DSO industry, and I was there weren't a ton of us there, but there's a handful of us in the DSO industry that were there at the very beginning. I always say we're in DSO 3.0 now. DSO 1.0, some of them didn't follow the rules the way they were supposed to. And there were allegations and lawsuits and things involving, the DSO encroaching on, clinical care and doing things like that. So I think because some dentists have it in their mind, particularly older dentists, not the younger ones sort of, understand what DSOs are, but some of the older dentists remember back to 25, 30 years ago and they say, hey, I don't want to affiliate with an organization that's going to do bad things or violate the law. So I think what they're saying when they make a point of saying that is, hey, that was 25, 30 years ago. The modern DSO gives complete clinical autonomy. And yeah, and virtually every DSO, of which I've been involved with over 700, they do. They leave the practice of dentistry and clinical functions in the hands of the licensed dentists and other licensed personnel, and they do comprehensive non-clinical support services. But there are some people that remember the old days, or maybe they heard something from a dentist that's now retired, but told them about those things, and they're a little concerned. So I think that's why a lot of the DSOs, and rightfully so, they make a point of saying, if you affiliate with us, you will have complete clinical autonomy and we will focus on the non-clinical administration portion of the practice.
So, but even within that, they can still support clinical decisions with AI tools or technology or implementation of other software solutions, right? Like, does that infringe on that autonomy at all?
No, I mean, they're obligated to present to the practice a whole host of functions to either make them better clinicians or improve same-store growth or improve efficiencies. And they present it. If a dentist looks at it and says, I absolutely, don't want to use this piece of equipment or don't want to use this brand. I want to use this other brand. In the end of the day, the dentist has autonomy to do that, but that's exceedingly rare. I mean, usually if they offer, something to them like Pearl AI or, Mike, I work with Pearl and things like that. If they offer Pearl AI or something like that, most of the dentists would say, great idea, let's implement it. But if a given dentist says, in this particular case, I don't want to use this tool or this thing, I just want to do it myself. Yeah, they have the autonomy to do that.
So you mentioned kind of being around at the inception of DSOs and that we're now DSO 3.0. Kind of take a step back. How did the Dykema DSO Industry Group even come to be?
Yeah, well, it started to explode. I mean, like 29 years, 30, I think it's 29 years I've been practicing. Soon it'll be 30. We're not getting any younger, but for now it's 29. DSOs began right around 27, 28, 29 years ago. I was representing group practices in the very beginning. And then, DSOs sort of came into existence. And, about 15 years ago, it started to really, or I thought it was poised to explode. I mean, everybody wanted, in terms of investors, to take a look at the dental sector, to maybe make some investments. Group practices were proliferating and then looking for private equity partners. And I said, this thing, like that song, this place is going to blow. I was like, this thing's getting ready to really go crazy here. I said, I was very successful, and I had, myself and a few colleagues, just helping me out, and they were almost 100% busy. And I said, we got to start to be methodical about this, right? There's so many subspecialties and disciplines within dentistry. I got to create a group. I mean, there's mergers and acquisitions, there's general corporate, there's healthcare regulatory, there's dental specific regulatory, there's DSO regulatory, there's real estate because of all the leases that we're signing, and, just a whole host of areas of the law, litigation for non-competes. And now there's regulatory investigations if Medicaid comes in or some, state dental board comes in. We had so much of this in labor and employment. We're employing employees and wage and hour issues and labor laws. All this stuff was happening. And I said, I got to get a group. I got to put this together. I got to get labor and specialists. I got to get real estate specialists. The firm I was at here, Dykema, had all these disciplines, but they weren't focused on DSOs or anything. And I said, I got to get a group here so that if a client calls up, a DSO, they have a real estate issue, I have it. They have a healthcare regulatory issue. They have a HIPAA issue, an OSHA issue. They get a dental board complaint. They want to do corporate documents. They want to buy another office. They want to sell an office. We're set up to do all that. And about 15 years ago, I started to put that together. I put it together with 5 original, counting me, we had 5 senior partners together. And now I think we're up to 72 professionals that work in our group across all these disciplines.
So you just mentioned a lot of that reasons why the group is the size that it is, all the different disciplines that you have in the dental space. When you talk about the regulatory challenges or non-competes, what are some of the biggest risks today for a DSO, liabilities that are kind of out there that they need to protect against? Where are you seeing lawsuits come from?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you something a little different, but it really sums it all up. We got our time on the show. We could talk about all kinds of stuff, but maybe when you asked me that question, you were thinking I was going to go into some specific things that come up. Honestly, it begins and ends with this. If you don't fundamentally understand the core business of dentistry, you're going to get into trouble. And you'll get into trouble across all kinds of stuff. You'll get into trouble with your affiliated associate dentist. You'll get in trouble with your owner dentist. You'll get in trouble with Medicaid. You'll get in trouble with the private payers. You'll get in trouble with your landlord somehow. I mean, it seems like if you don't fundamentally understand the business of dentistry and you want to go buy a DSO organization or go, form a DSO, it's going to be really tricky. But if you take the time to understand the fundamental business of dentistry, or if you're an investor and you don't get it, but you back the right operators that understand it, and they do, not that you're going to be exempt from, stuff will happen to you, but you will be, stuff will happen to you few and far between. You'll have problems every couple of years. When you get bigger, you're always going to get something, but every couple of years you'll have a problem. But there's organizations that every week they've got something. Literally every week they've stepped into a pothole, and they've got multiple lawsuits, multiple regulatory actions, multiple investigations, and usually the hallmark of a situation like that, like a troubled organization that's got lots and lots of problems, isn't bad luck. It's they didn't fundamentally understand the business of dentistry when they got involved, and now they're paying the price for that.
Did we see an increase of situations like that over the past 5 years when investment just in the industry became such a large focus for private equity?
Yeah, I was at the ADSO's private equity event. I think it was on October 1st, and they had a lot of private equity groups there. And one of the private equity groups said people did stupid stuff with cheap money. That was something that one of the private equity groups said. I don't remember who, that was there, but that phrase has stuck with me. People did stupid stuff with cheap money, and right now we're digging our way out of that. Not everybody did. Some people were very smart, and their organizations are still doing well right now. But there were people that did stupid stuff with cheap money, and we are starting to, or not starting. We've been working through the consequences of that for really the last 2 years or so. I mean, this downturn of the interest rates and inflation and everything else really started to hit the latter half of 2022. And that's when the interest rates started rising in like a breathtaking way. It happened so fast. And once that happened, a typical example I give, no one in particular, but just a representative sample is you might have had an organization that had $100,000, Mike, of free cash every month. That was their EBITDA was $100,000, per month of, sort of free cash. And then the interest rates doubled or tripled in some cases. And all of a sudden you went from, at the end of every month, having $100,000 of free cash to having to lay off 5 or 10 people to break even. I mean, that's how breathtaking it occurred. In the beginning of 2022, you had $100,000 of free cash every month. You throw in company parties, everybody's happy. And by the middle to late 2022, you're like, who are we going to lay off? We got to make budget cuts. We've got to make drastic things just to kind of break even. That's what happens when interest rates triple.
Absolutely. And I think, we've seen longer hold times for lots of private equity investments. I think there's probably some groups out there that are relatively anxious to get a return on their investment, ideally, or figure out what they're going to do.
Just to emphasize it, we've seen that in time. Yeah. It wasn't like no, the way you said it wasn't like the PE groups decided, hey, we're going to hold these things longer. It's though that was rained down the throat by these very challenging market conditions. I think their mandate is still 3 to 5 years. We'd like to unload these things to somebody else, but that's just not been the reality, unfortunately.
Do you think we're getting towards the other side of that now? Do you see like light at the end of the tunnel?
We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I might be too conservative because I'm getting this question all the time. I'm thinking third to fourth quarter of next year. I mean, I would love to be able to tell everybody, hey, starting in January or March or something. It's going to take a while. A lot of damage has been done by these interest rates. I think it's a very positive thing that there's been 2 interest rates cut. And I've said this over, like I said, this is not a political show. We're not Fox. We're not MSNBC. I don't want to wade into everybody getting upset. I'm just going to state the facts. The facts is this administration that did get elected is going to be much more favorable for M&A. I'll leave it at that. We don't got to get into the whole debate about, presidents and candidates. I'm just saying this is going to be a much more favorable administration. And when people were asking me about all that stuff before the election, I was just saying, I know people have strong emotions one way or the other, but I'm just stating if the Republicans get elected, I think it's going to make the recovery happen much quicker here. And we're going to be doing M&A deals probably, third quarter of next year. We'll be laying the groundwork first and second quarter, and then it'll all sort of ramp up by third quarter, maybe a little earlier, but something like that. And if, when I was talking about it before, I was like, but if, the Republicans don't get elected, this could go on for a longer period of time. So I think if you're a fan of M&A, you may not be a fan of our, president-elect or anything like that. But if you're a fan of M&A and getting the deal started back up and doing all this election was a very positive result from that standpoint, Mike. I know some people, on a variety of levels are upset about things, but from a purely M&A market thing, I think the result in this election was very favorable.
Yeah, it would be hard to argue with that. You look at what was taking place or not taking place really over the past 4 years and how difficult it became in many industries for there to be acquisitions and mergers with companies. And there was a high level of scrutiny on all of them some of them seemed kind of silly at the level of scrutiny that were on there. So I think it will be interesting to watch moving forward. Obviously, the markets also like the news of what happened. How's your Bitcoin? Doing well?
A lot of my clients are really involved in that. And I've been out several, social outings with clients that are really passionate about Bitcoins. And they've, I've learned a lot just from listening to them and So I'd learned a bit about Bitcoin, but I've never gotten into it, myself. I know it's not as heavily regulated as other things. And there's been some, very widely reported meltdowns of certain marketplaces. And that kind of gives me pause. Some of my clients are really excited about it. Like every time I say, but what about, that guy that got arrested and prosecuted? They're like, oh, don't worry about him. This is still doing good, and they're really bullish on it. But I don't know enough about it, and it's not as regulated as the regular market. So I kind of have steered away from Bitcoin. But, I have a DSO that wants to be the first DSO to be purchased by Bitcoin. So, I may, no matter what, get involved in this here, pretty soon. But admittedly, I'm not. You can talk to me about DSOs all day long, but Bitcoin, we're going to have a short conversation. I don't know enough about it.
Well, that's something that you and Eric can talk about next time you guys hang out, is that he also is no Bitcoin. He's like, I don't know about this thing. So we've got division in our leadership team. We've got half of us excited about it.
Well, Warren Buffett had a very famous quote, and you can't argue with him too much. He's been, successful on an unprecedented level of investment. He said, if I don't understand it, I don't invest in it. And that's sort of been my rule. If I don't understand something, I won't invest in it. I have a couple of rules. One, I have to understand it first. And then second, I have to believe in it, because sometimes you understand something. You're like, hey, I see what you're doing, but that's a real dumb idea. I'm not interested in doing it. So you got to understand it, and you have to believe in it. And if there's something that I understand and something I believe in, yeah, I'm going to invest in it. But Bitcoin, I just don't understand it. I'm not, if you guys, people listening, like Bitcoin, absolutely. It's just me personally. I don't understand enough about it to get into it.
Totally get it. And I remember hearing that quote and I was like, makes a lot of sense. He was never very bullish on any of the crypto stuff, and a very smart guy. So definitely cause for pausing a little bit. So, we talked about the groups that didn't have a true understanding of the dental industry, that they could shoot themselves in the foot, run into all these different challenges legally. Then you also have the interest rates that take place. So there's some of these groups out there that kind of fall into the bucket where they were the former, and then now they're having to deal with the latter. Is there still more kind of fallout, do you think, to come over the next, year or so, couple years, where we'll see like fire sales maybe with particular groups that just can't retain their value? Like, how does that work itself out of the market?
I think the worst is behind us. But there are some right now, obviously we don't mention them on shows like this, but there are some right now that I know for a fact are still struggling, and, they've got the COVID hangover, plus, the dramatic turn in the interest rates did such damage to their business that even with them going down, I'm unsure if they're going to make it. But I think the worst is behind us. For a while there, starting around end of 22, first couple quarters of 23, really the whole year, we're in the whole year of 23 and first quarter or so of this year, it was like every week or two, one of those things was coming up. And now they're few and far between. There's a couple that are, sort of right on the cusp. Like they might have it turned around or they might not. So, it wouldn't shock me if you see one or two more, before this is over with. But the worst is behind us. This is not like, every week or every couple weeks, there's some giant calamity or something. I think most of that has, been worked out of the system over the last, I'd say, all of 23 and first couple quarters of 24.
So over the past 5 years since I've joined dental, I've seen a few larger acquisitions. Like Heartland acquired American Dental Partners. There was like 240-ish offices, something at the time. Sinrava with Mid-Atlantic and Western put that together. We saw Smile Brands acquire Midwest, which was a 200-something location group at the time, which significantly added to their total location count. Do you think we'll see more of that? Or do you think people are moving back into smaller acquisitions? What sort of trends do you believe are taking place along those lines?
Well, no, you're going to see everything. Okay. It's just a question of when it gets fired up. Right now, it's not conducive to the large deals. Like you mentioned 2 or 3 of those. You wouldn't do those deals today. Like I'm saying, if they were available, if they hadn't been done, but they're available, the interest rates are too high and the market doesn't support the valuation. So you wouldn't see those today. You will see them again. But it's going to require the interest rates to go down. And like I'm saying, third quarter next year or something like that is what you're going to see, for some deals like that. But, there's typically sort of three things that go on. You've got solo and onesies and twosies that, a lot of the DSOs are, and those have continued. We're doing onesies and twosies this year. I mean, they're not too super sexy. It's like if you're bunting on first base, nobody's hitting any home runs, but you're moving your way around gradually. You're winning a ball game 1-0 or 2-1. People want to win the game 15-2 or something. You're not doing that, but they've continued. And the onesies and twosies have not stopped even in these challenging conditions. Then you've got groups, like you got 8 offices, you got 10, you got 15, and then they're being acquired by certain platforms, or they're being acquired to start a platform. Either a PE group says, hey, I'm acquiring these 20 offices as my platform deal, and then I'll add to it later, or those 10 or 15 offices are getting acquired by a big DSO and getting added there. And then the third thing that you got is big DSOs buying other big DSOs. You missed Aspen buying Clear Choice. I know you were around for that one as well when Aspen Dental bought Clear Choice Dental implants. They did that sort of near the end of 2020, I believe. But around the same time as the Smile Brands Midwest Dental transaction closed. But those have been few and far between, those larger deals, just because the conditions have been, very tricky. And the other thing that's been few and far between is recapitalizations. The giant organizations, their PE sponsor selling to another PE sponsor. We would always have 4 or 5 of those a year. If we went back to 2016, 17, 18, 19, end of 2020, part of 21, you'd always have at least 4 or 5, maybe 10 in some years, big deals of, very large organizations changing hands. There's been pretty much none of that since middle to late 2022, just because the market conditions don't support, a $1 billion transaction or something, or some of them, by the time we get on the other end of this are going to be multiple billions of dollars, but it just doesn't support it right now.
So I'd be curious for your opinion on this. So if you look at Heartland, the largest DSO in the country, by all accounts, really well-run organization, lots of great processes in place and really great practices. Do you foresee, or would you think there will be somebody larger than Heartland in the future?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends. There's a global thing. If you ask Heartland, Pat Bauer is a good friend of mine, and I spend a lot of time, sometimes talking about Heartland with him and looking at a Heartland. If you ask Heartland wants to be number one, and they're going to do everything they can to be number one. But, is there a scenario where, DSOs number 2, 3, and 4 all merge together and they surpass DSO number 1, or somebody from the Middle East or Europe, or somebody comes in here and consolidates several of them? Yeah, I mean, it's theoretically possible. Will it happen? It's anybody's guess, and it will take a good degree of execution, sort of to make that happen. But, is it theoretically possible? I suppose it is. But if you talk to, my good friends at Heartland, they're going to tell you, maintain, their position as number one.
You mentioned investment or consolidation from Europe or from the Middle East. Are we seeing more investment interest from other regions of the world in the U.S. market?
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. I mean, most of it's confidential. You can't talk about who, but, certainly can talk about, there's a lot of interest from the Middle East and from Europe and Japan and Australia. I mean, there just is. There's a lot of interest. The degree to which they've been able to pull the trigger has been constrained by the interest rates, and things like that. Canada, too, there's a lot of interest from Canada wanting to come down here and do stuff. There's a lot of interest from across the world, insurance companies, because insurance companies, some of them are sitting on surpluses of billions and billions of dollars, and they want to come pay cash for some things. So there's just a lot of folks on the sidelines that could really do some game-changing things like that you're talking about. Like all of a sudden, they put together the largest DSO in the world, or the largest DSO in America. I mean, there are players involved that are capable of doing that, but right now they're hamstrung by the market.
Are there any regulatory concerns or challenges with investment into the U.S. dental market from other countries?
I mean, yes, but nothing that should really stop it. But there's more approvals, right? I mean, like I'll use a easy example. If you're a terrorist organization, you're not going to get approved and you can't buy it. Okay. I don't care if you're a well-known terrorist organization, you got a lot of money and you're like, we want to diversify instead of blowing things up. We want to buy a DSO, but you're foreign, you're probably not going to pass the requisite checks and you're not going to get regulatory approval. But if you're not literally something like that, or like, unfortunately right now, like, you're not Russia or North Korea or somebody that's subject to sanctions, if you're Iran or Russia or North Korea or somebody that's subject to some type of sanctions, or you're a terrorist organization, yeah, that's going to be a problem. But as long as you're just, a European or a Japanese or an Australian, Canadian company in good standing, yeah, I mean, there's more approvals and the transaction probably will take a little longer to close. But yeah, there'll be no obstacle. You absolutely can do that.
So in the founding of DSOs, there's a lot of different equity structures that people put in place.
And I don't like it. There's that old saying, if you've seen one DSO, you've seen one DSO. And there's a lot of truth to that. I don't like it. I think there's a couple really preferred structures we need to do. But you're right. People have done all sorts of stuff. And it's because a lot of dentists founded these organizations and they lacked the resources to go get lawyers at the beginning or competent lawyers. Maybe they were using their country club lawyer that was a jack of all trades, master of none, to put the thing together. And he or she did the best they could, but, weren't really specialized. So all sorts of weird stuff is out there. But if you're standing up a platform, from scratch, there's really only one or two ways to really do it.
So what are those two ways? And if you were standing up your own platform, how are you structuring it?
No, I mean, the conventional DSO model with a potential joint venture is the way to do it. Okay. You have a DSO entity, then you have clinical entities that are 100% owned by licensed dentists, and you put your DSO business agreements in place between them with the possibility of joint venturing. Obviously, joint ventures are becoming, that we used to do them years ago, then they went out of favor. Now they're back into favor because in these challenging market conditions, the DSO can conserve more capital by partnering with people and doing joint ventures versus doing, 100% acquisition. So, and also it incentivizes your dentist partners to get in the trenches with you and grow the organization. So, if I was doing one from scratch, I would do a conventional DSO model with joint ventures. I really feel like that's a tried and true way to kind of do it. But people have put so many permutations. I mean, we could go on this show for an hour just talking about permutations and way to do it, but I don't even want to because it's not productive. It's like if you got a house, Mike, you can paint your bedroom purple if you want. If you're a fan of Barney and you want to paint your bedroom purple and do, maybe the paint is only a half example because it's relatively easy to repaint, but whatever it is, you want to knock down, you've got a 4-bedroom house and you want to knock down 2 bedrooms to put a pickleball court in the middle of your house. That might work for you, but when the time comes to sell it, you're going to have a hard time selling it because they're going to be like, we ain't never seen a pickleball, court in the middle of bedrooms 2 and 3. We kind of wanted bedrooms 2 and 3 for our kids. We don't want the pickleball, ball court there. And if we got to buy this, we're going to have to put it, wall back up, clean up the court, redo we don't want that. We'll just go up the street to a house that, children are in the bedroom. We'll go to that house. We don't need your things. And it's the same thing with some of these organizations. If you make it too exotic and too complicated, when the time comes to sell it and, a buyer walks up, they're going to say, no, this is too much work. I mean, we're going to have to, do a complete reorganization before we do the deal. Before we do the deal, we're going to have to clean up all these corporations and then worry about liabilities and changing payers and change of controls and other things. And then if we survive all that, then we can do the deal. If you make it difficult like that, you might not have any buyers. People might not be interested in it. And that's something you want to consider.
Yeah, there was a startup that I think I heard you talk about at Dykema, and they're managing cap tables for DSOs.
They are. I don't know if we're going to mention names or something, but I am working with a startup that is managing cap tables for DSOs because that can get quite complicated. And soon they're going to roll out production for associates. So people in real time can track the value of their shares and the value of their effort if it's a joint venture or if it's a, associate percent of production situation. I think it's a really good concept, and they're starting to get a lot of traction.
No, I think it's great.
Am I allowed to mention them or not?
Yeah, please. No, go for it.
company's called Pulse Equity, and I think they're absolutely terrific. Matt and Nick are in charge of it, and I like it. I mean, I like the concept. I was talking to you about it. I mentioned them from stage at Dykema because I like what they're doing, and a lot of CFOs and folks have difficulty keeping up with the cap table and real-time analysis, and they're doing a great job at Pulse Equity. So with your permission, I'm happy to mention them. I like it.
Yeah, no, it's great. And for the clinicians and the dentists, it provides a lot more transparency. And I think a lot of folks don't really understand how equity works anyways. So having the ability to actually be able to see it and have that transparency and understand what that means for you is pretty important.
I mean, it avoids surprises. Typically, if you don't have that, you find out at the end of the year, maybe, am I getting if you're a joint venture, were we profitable this year? Am I getting a bonus? Or maybe in your brain, you think you're getting a bonus, but it wasn't as profitable as you thought. And then at the end of the year, they're like, you're getting 10 grand and you thought you were getting 100 grand. And now it's like World War III versus if you could keep up with that in real time, you would know exactly what was happening.
So from a systems perspective, also kind of in the same waves, there's lots of variations of equity and there's lots of variations of what DSOs offer from a support perspective. There's also kind of some disagreement maybe on how systems should look and what sort of systems people should put in place. And what I mean by that is you have the fragmented solution where you just add a data layer on top and you get your data, but all your practices use whoever they want to use from a PMS perspective. And you don't really mandate technology. Then you have the standardization option.
Watch me.
Okay. Shaking your head for those that are listening.
That's not what you just said. Don't even mention that as a possibility. I mean, I hate to interrupt, but you were mentioning you could just let everybody use whatever systems they want to use and just layer it on top. I mean, there are some organizations that for a variety of reasons have inherited that and found themselves in that situation and now are working out of it. I don't want to present that to your audience as a way to do it. If you have a choice, you should never do that. You have to have centralized uniform system. Okay. Obviously we're doing the show with you, so we're going to talk about Denticon. But my point is, let's talk about PMS system. Let's say you had Denticon. We'll do that because we're on the show with you. You can't have one where 30% of the practices are using Denticon, the other third are using another one, another third are using another one. That's a recipe for a disaster. If you're standing up a platform, everybody's got to be on, for example, Denticon. Same thing with, AI. We talked about Pearl. Everybody's got to be on Pearl. You can't have half of them on Pearl, half of them on something else. And we could go down the line of a whole bunch of other solutions of that nature. You got to have uniform centralization. And, I know there are some organizations because I know when you're out there on behalf of Denticon doing work, you see these organizations and everybody's on their own stuff, but that's not a viable long-term option. You got to get everybody on the same PMS, on the same reporting, on the same AI, on the same patient finance, on the same membership plan. I could keep going, but everybody's got to be on the same thing or it becomes unwieldy. And when the time comes to sell it, no buyer is going to walk into that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we did 4 acquisitions over the past 5 years, and each one would come with their own different systems at the time. Like some use Salesforce, some use HubSpot, some use Zoho for their CRM. We said, no, it's all got to be Salesforce. You can't have these core systems of record being different across all of your different business units and expect that you're going to be super successful with that approach. It's a workflow issue. It's an optimization issue.
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, you can buy one that's on a different system, but you got to assimilate them on yours. Like if you're like, hey, I like this company, this is a great acquisition, go ahead and do it. But if they're on something different, you got to assimilate them shortly after the transaction closes. You can't maintain, a steady state of, hey, our normal state of operation is everybody's on all this different stuff. You can't do that.
Yeah. Now, this one's a little bit more, I think there's a little bit more debate that goes along with it. Standardization versus centralized services. So it's standardization, you're all on the same platform, you all use the same technology, but you might not have a central billing office. You might have the billing still take place at the practice level. And there's arguments to be made for that. And I think the size of the organization plays into it. Same with a central scheduling. You might do centralized scheduling, or you might still have your practices do that. Do you have any strong opinions or viewpoints as to the efficiency or lack of or benefit of any of those options?
It's interesting. It's an organization-specific analysis, okay? Some or, my one rule of thumb, and I know you've heard this before in other contexts, is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay. If I'm a DSO and I'm buying a platform of, 5 offices and they're billing with ruthless precision. I mean, these offices, their RCM cycles, 15 days, everybody's paying all the time and everything's going well. I don't know that I got to say, stop doing what you're doing. Let's put you on some centralized thing. It might be just fine. And what I've noticed as of late, I'm saying last 2 years, what was exposed by these interest rates is a lot of organizations just assumed that the default was we're going to do centralized everything, and they ran up the overhead. And when the interest rates doubled or tripled, they really failed. I mean, they were in very big trouble financially. If an organization is, here's my standard. My standard is I already said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But also, if you're able to do something efficiently and to competence down at the practice level, then there's really not a need to go acquire additional overhead and centralize it. I mean, really, if you're talking about things like billing and collecting and, those sort of things at the practice, there are some things like everybody's got to be on the same PMS system. There's got to be a way to press one button and get uniform reporting across 100 offices. You got to be able to do that. You can't silo. Even if the offices are lean and mean and doing well, you can't silo 100 accounting systems. Like I got to go to each location or log into their remote computer to get the results of those locations because I can't look at one screen and see all of them. Yeah, you can't have that. But in terms of things like you're talking about billing and collecting and those functions, if the practice level is doing that efficiently and everything's in order, you probably don't need the added overhead of doing centralization. One thing I'll say on that point, Mike, because it's really important. I learned this recently by some really good operators. If you've got people at the local practice level that are doing billing and collecting and you repurpose that to centralization, you've got to find something for those two people to do or it's dead weight.
Absolutely. What is something that you're bullish on with dental and what's something that you are bearish on?
So I'm bullish on artificial intelligence. Okay. I've said this over and over again. It's the single biggest advancement in the history of dentistry. Diagnostic AI is terrific. We talked a little bit about Pearl on this, on the show so far. Absolutely love diagnostic AI. I also like AI for revenue cycle management. I like AI for patient retention, listening to phone calls. I think it's absolutely, terrific, and it's revolutionizing, the way we're doing dentistry. And it's also offsetting or counteracting the effects of staff shortages, because if the AI can do things, maybe we can get by with staff shortages of both clinical and non-clinical employees. So I'm very bullish, right now on AI, something that I'm not a fan of. Let me say it this way, rather than single something out. I am not a fan of good ideas that lack implementation. And this could apply to a bunch of things and this is sort of an opinion that I've come to, Mike, in about the last year. As you know, I advise, I think it's 24 or 25 dental technology companies. And something that we learned the hard way over the last 2 years in doing a deep dive is, if you've got a really good idea, that's a value-added idea that you can present to a DSO or a group practice or something, the solos is different, but say a group practice or a DSO, and everybody thinks it's a good idea and everybody thinks it's a value add. Well, if we're playing football, you just got a first down from the 20 to maybe the 30 or 35 yard line, but you're nowhere near the end zone. I mean, good job. Like, you came up with a good idea and, it's a value add, but, you're sitting there at midfield or on the 40 yard line. You're nowhere near the end zone. You got to have an implementation plan. And that seems like just about every week I get a lot of phone calls because I like to learn, because of my event conference, I like to present things. I want to know everything that's out there. So I eagerly jump on these phone calls, to learn about all these things. And it just seems like there's an awful lot of good ideas out there that theoretically sound okay, but they lack an implementation plan. And by the way, it's your responsibility, okay? If you come out there and you go sit at the C-suite of a DSO and you present your product or your solution to them and they agree and they say, hey, we like it, let's sign a contract. it's your responsibility to implement. It's not their responsibility. You got to come up with the plan, because I've seen it happen like so many times in the last, year or so, where somebody signs a contract, they're excited. And then 6 months later, I said, hey, how's that going? Oh, it's awful. Nobody uses it. Like, they signed the contract, but the practices aren't using it. They're not signing up. They're not doing it. So we're actually losing money. I've seen companies sign a contract with, DSO ABC with 200 offices, and they think this is going to be a game changer and their product's going to roll out to 200 offices. And you talk to them, 6 months later, and they're losing money on the deal because people are not using their stuff because they failed to come up with an adequate implementation plan. So I would just say generally, because there's not any specific thing that I hate, but what I would generally say is I'm not a fan of even great ideas. I mean, obviously I'm not a fan of bad ideas, but even good, really good ideas that lack an implementation plan, I'm not a fan of it. If you're going to present something to this marketplace, your work is not done when you've come up with a good value-added idea. You got to come up with an implementation plan, how you're going to roll it out to all these offices. And if you don't have that, then you're going to struggle.
100%. When we're selling our product, the biggest reason that somebody does not make a decision is because they do nothing, because there's the fear of the implementation. And it's what we sell is practice management. Is very complex to rip and replace, but it goes beyond that. I think it's like there's the implementation portion, and then there's also does this all work together? Can you connect with the APIs? Can you get access?
I mean, that's another thing. I don't know. We don't got a lot of time left, but the biggest obstacles, if you said, hey, we extended this for another hour, we're coming back, we could have a whole thing on integration, because the biggest obstacles to new technology right now in the marketplace are a little bit of user resistance. I mean, a little bit, there might be some old line people that don't want to do it, but you can overcome that. But the biggest thing to me is either lack of an implementation plan, which we talked about, or integration. The third one is if it doesn't integrate. And I've said this many times in many different contexts. Could you imagine in television, if you had to buy one TV for Netflix, one TV for Hulu, one TV for Disney, because they said, nope, we're not integrated. You got to get a separate TV for that. There'd be like a riot in the streets. Like I always make the joke, that would be the true threat to democracy. There'd be like a riot. Everybody'd be going crazy if that happened. And the TV folks understood this. So you buy almost any smart TV anywhere, it's got, open architecture with just about any possible you would want to put in there. One of my nephews plays lacrosse, and we wanted to get the lacrosse app to watch college lacrosse. And I have my regular Samsung TV, and I was like, oh, no way, this is going to, sure enough, I download, oh, we got the lacrosse app. Next thing I know, we're watching lacrosse on that TV. I mean, they've got that down to a science. Dentistry does not, unfortunately. They're making a lot of improvements. I know Planet DDS has a lot of integrations they're working on and does a terrific job, but nobody's got it to my satisfaction. Obviously, we all know I'm a big fan of Planet DDS, but nobody has done this to my satisfaction. We got to get a lot more open architecture in the industry.
I think people are starting to shift in that direction, which is a positive, but it does take time. Absolutely. And it's just not going to be something that can snap our fingers and fix, but the development of APIs and them making it easy to use them goes a long ways. And in the past, there'd be a lot of APIs that people still didn't want you to use, or they just wouldn't develop them. So we're making progress. It is frustrating. There's a lot of wasted money spent investing in cool technology that doesn't work together. And you're like, well, you can't use it. It's no good.
That's the other issue, right? I said, if you lack an implementation plan, that's a problem. But the same thing, if you're not integrated, this could be like the greatest thing, but if it's not integrated with any of the PMS systems and you got to close out one viewer box, open up another one to get in, I mean, the staff just won't do it. We'd like to say they would, but we know better. They just, we now have at least a couple years worth of data points, and we know that the average staff member, unless you've got like just a superhero staff member, the average, normal staff member is not going to do it. They're just not going to do it.
Yeah. So I know you're a rabid fan of the Dental Economist Show. Tell me all the time. Get text messages you for like every week. Like, that was an amazing episode, Mike. I just really appreciated it. Aside from this show, do you have any podcasts that you like or that you recommend, or any books that kind of stick out to you? You mentioned like you're kind of a perpetual learning. I know a lot of that happens through conversations with folks, but any content that's out there, not necessarily about dental, but just that's like been important to you in your kind of quest for professional growth?
Well, the reason this show is my second favorite show, Mike, is because of all things DSO with Planet DDS, which of course, favorite show. I mean, and I don't know what to say. I certainly, no one will blame me for that being my favorite show, but and given that it's sponsored by Planet DDS, I doubt you'll have too much objection to that show.
I only thought I was going to lose my job. I thought I was going to lose this show, and Beth was just going to take this over too. So that was my only concern.
We're coming for you eventually. I mean, I'm sorry. I know you've done a good job with this, but we're coming for you. But I like my show. We talk about a lot of different things on it. I really enjoy that. There's a book called The Go-Giver I like. It really talks about relationships, and it really is sort of the theme of how I built the Dykema DSO group and how I try to operate. It's the idea of giving without expectation of anything in return. And you really got to do it. I mean, some people say, they'll do it until they say, you mean I got to spend 4 hours and I'm not going to get anything back? And then they bail out of it. You really got to do it. I mean, you really do. And sometimes you spend 4 hours or 8 hours and you get absolutely nothing in return other than you helped somebody else. But over the averages of doing that, week after week and month after month and year after year, it pays back in dividends. And, the book that I like is called The Go-Giver. I've given it out to my staff here. I've given it out at some DSO events for people to read, but it really sort of is a microcosm of how I've tried to conduct not just my group, but myself, individually. And that's kind of, there's been some other things that I've looked at that none come immediately to mind, but that have that general theme of, of relationships. One other thing, I recently attended at our partner meeting, the Kellogg Business School in Chicago did a presentation about networking. And it was like adding science to networking. Like a lot of people think, hey, you just run out here and shake hands, and you can do that. But they said the most valuable people in any organization, and this is how I've tried to conduct myself, are connectors. Okay, because what they found is most people that network stay in their social circle, their bubbles. I go to, my church, where I work, the school, and that's all these people over here. And then those people do the same thing and you get all these bubbles. And then there's a couple rare individuals like unicorns that are in all the bubbles and they connect the bubbles. And that's how I've kind of conducted myself. You got to try to know everybody. You got to go to things that you're even, uncomfortable doing. Like the biggest example I've said over and over again, I was the only male board member of Women in DSO. It was me and 8 other women. And at the advisory board, it was me and 40 other women. You want to talk about the ultimate, like, gee, which one's not like the other? Is this a little uncomfortable here? But now, if you got to do that, but that made it so easy for me to be a part of, like, for example, people in color in DSO, because I didn't want in DSO. I was like, I don't care if I don't look like, everybody in people in color DSO. I want to be involved in that organization and I want to, get to know those folks. So you can do things, you can be a connector. You can be like, if somebody says, hey, I want to meet somebody in Woman in DSO, I may look like as the only guy, the odd guy, but I'm like, oh yeah, I know everybody over there. I can get you, over there. And likewise, Dykema has supported people in color and DSO. If somebody says, hey, do you know? Yeah, I may not look like that one too, but I'm like, yeah, I can get you over there too. Same thing with the office managers, the hygienists. I mean, any facet of this industry, I can connect somebody, to that. So that's been a very valuable lesson when I tell people everybody wants to go out and build your network, whether you're sales or legal like me or something else. You want to be a connector. You want to be able to introduce people from certain bubbles to other bubbles. And the only way you really can do that is, sometimes you got to go outside your comfort level and visit certain, meetings, certain groups, certain situations where you're like, I know, just like in Woman in DSO, I know going in, I'm going to be the only guy. I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb here, but I'm going to go in there with an open mind and I'm going to do it. And that's how you become a connector. And that's the most valuable thing for anybody listening to this that's trying to build a network.
It's great advice. There's the old saying that your network is your net worth. And I think that there is a lot of truth to that. And I've gotten to also watch a couple of connectors that we have in our company with Johnny Adams and Beth. And, what you guys all do, it's like a really special thing. And it's not something that I think is just instinctual. You kind of have to force yourself to make it happen.
You do, but once, once you do it a couple times and you get used to people will welcome you. When I go over to some organizations and I'm like, look, I've not been a part of this anymore. I don't know anybody, but I want to come here. 1 out of 10 times they're like, yeah, get out of here. You're stupid. But 9 out of 10 times they're like, well, welcome. Come on in. It's all right that you don't know anybody. Let's introduce you to everybody. And you really get to know people that you otherwise wouldn't have met. And it's just tremendous in terms of building your network, building your brand, getting people, to help you, being able to help people. I mean, it's tremendous.
So we're almost at time. I want to be respectful of that. Last question. We didn't even get to talk about it. We could definitely do a second hour or a third hour for that matter. There's so much that we can still get to, but Dykema, the show, the definitive conference, it's going to be in August this year. And I know this is like a year-round event now, like the planning of it to make it as special as it is. Anything like a sneak preview or anything that's going to be a little different, too early to share, but anything that you'd like to tell the audience about?
Yeah. I mean, it's August 6th through the 8th this year. I guess I will. I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I'm going to do it anyway. We just signed John McEnroe, and we're really excited to do that. I know there's going to be a formal announcement, and they're probably going to get mad at me, on this. But I'm excited about that. John McEnroe's wanted to do our event the last couple of years, but due to Wimbledon being in July, we could never make it happen. But because this year, due to our own scheduling at the Gaylord, it had to be August 6th through the 8th because other dates weren't available. It's pushed back a little later, and John McEnroe was available. I've been a big fan of his, been watching him since I was 7 or 8 years old or something. And, he's got a great perspective on things, and he's done things his way, right or wrong. I think a lot of people, or myself included, I think I'm going to be interviewing him at some point, are really excited to kind of, hear his perspective on the good and the bad. And if you've ever seen him or read his book, he's pretty open about it. I mean, he is. He tells you the things that he did that maybe were unconventional that worked. And then he'll tell you the things that he did that, maybe he would do differently. So I'm looking forward to, having him at our event.
That's very cool. Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciated the conversation. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Absolutely, Mike. This was terrific. Thanks for having me.
The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS, home of Dental OS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you for listening.